CogniZense. I like to start with something funny. And this man was walking down the street, and he got brutally attacked by a gang who beat him up and stabbed him and robbed him and left him on the side of the road for dead. And psychologist comes along, and he sees the man unconscious and bleeding, and he runs up to him and he says, "Oh my goodness, whoever did this needs some serious help." Now, I spent enough time in the psychology space to truly appreciate that joke, because that person who did that does need some serious help. But you may not know this. The vast majority of people who go to psychologists actually have one thing in mind that they want. Anyone want to guess what it is? You want to be told they're okay. And I'll just extend that. They want to feel better. Very few people want to get better. It's actually very rare. Vast majority of people just want to feel better. But it is in the getting better that we make dramatic changes in our lives. It's in the getting better that we feel better way more often, if not all the time. This seminar is about getting better. This seminar is a journey of understanding around psychology, philosophy, spirituality, and it's a hard-pressed fight in the sense that how we got here. So let's talk a little bit about that. My journey. I've come to believe, understand, know, that the Asian proverb is true. The mind's a wonderful servant, but a terrible master. And yet, many of us live our lives with our minds as our master. And I'm going to explain this in a lot of detail. So this seminar is what I've come to know. This seminar is about the inner journey. Let's just get this out of the way right at the beginning. You are not who you think you are. You are not who you think you are. Oscar Wilde said, "To live is the rarest thing in the world. Most people exist, that's all." The human condition. Vast majority of people live in a prison of their own making. They spend their time building, assessing, and maintaining something they call the self. Freud called this the ego. And it consumes an enormous amount of time and resources. Yet this me remains an enigma. Who are you? First interactive piece of the seminar. Who are you? I would like a couple people to weigh in on who they are, starting with the two words, I am, and fill in the blank. I am anybody. I am Cindy. I am full of mouth. All right. That works. But are these labels that you've given yourself or others given you really who you are? I mean, before you were those things, weren't you still you? Before you got those labels, weren't you still you? There's an argument in psychology, and actually spirituality too, that the only thing you can actually be is something you control. So you can't control what other people bestow on you in the way of titles, so you can't be your title. And you can't control the aging of your body, so you can't be your body. You see where I'm going with this? It's an interesting conundrum, because we're not, I would argue, our bodies or our experiences or our stories or our accomplishment. That's just too shallow. We're something beyond those things. Because if I took those things away from you, wouldn't you still be you? Everything you said, if I took it away, you'd still be you, right? This is a really important point, because it's going to drive home the problem we have in society, and it's going to clear up for us how we move forward to be more effective in our own lives. So we're going to do a mind experiment. Anyone here ever hear of the ship of Theseus? So every time you're replacing something on the boat, you're replacing the stern, you're replacing the keel, you're replacing a porthole, you're replacing the rudder, you're replacing the steering wheel. Every time you replace it and you set it aside, it's still the boat, right? I mean, anyone walking by would still say the boat's the boat. But there will come a point where every part on the boat's replaced. Is the boat still the boat? Sure is the boat. Sure, but wait a minute. What if I take all the spare parts I set aside and I make another boat? Then which boat's the boat? Don't expect an answer. It's a mind experiment. But I do expect the analogy. Every 5 to 7 years, every cell in your body is replaced. You are not the same person you were when you were 7, not the same person you were 16. You're not the same person you were when you're 25, and a few of us have a few extra iterations beyond that. And yet, don't we all maintain that we're still ourselves? Hold that thought. Self versus spirit. You are not what you're looking for. And I have to do some defining up front because defining becomes very important in this seminar. From now on, whenever I use the word self, I'm talking about your ego. This is the story you tell about yourself to yourself. Self is always your story of you. When I talk about your inner essence, I'm going to refer to you as consciousness or spirit or CogniZense or awareness or some other version of that. Because they're different things. They're actually very different things, but we tend to use them both the same term. So I will be careful to only use self when I'm talking about the story you tell me about yourself. If I asked you, you'd say you're a father, you're a soccer coach, you're a business executive. That's the self I'm talking about when I say self. Any questions on that? This is going to become obvious because I'm just going to do it the whole way and it'll make sense. Okay. You're not what you're looking for. Lao Tzu once said, when I let go of who I am, I become what I might be. This may surprise you, and it may not, but did you know that most people are dissatisfied? Right? Isn't that shocking? It's true, though. Most people are dissatisfied. And almost everyone lives in this gray twilight, and they sleepwalk through life. I'm going to validate many of these as we go. As a matter of fact, most people spend their time comparing, striving, achieving, and accumulating because they're the ways of the world. And as such, we're kind of curved in on ourselves. Because whenever you're looking at doing things for yourself or you're talking about self, you're pointing this way, right? You're pointing this way. You're not pointing out there. And as such, this limits our existence to some degree. Most everyone feels incomplete, inadequate, or discontent as if something's missing in life. Does anyone in here feel like something's missing? Inadequate, discontent, something? Now, there's a really important part of this phraseology that would be great if that showed up, but it doesn't. What's the key, what's the verb in this sentence, this last bullet point? Feels is the verb. And it's really important. It's critically important. Because the thing is, it's always a feeling. Now, were you giving negative feelings? And if I asked you to come up with negative feelings in your world, you would definitely be able to come up with negative feelings, right? But they're all feelings. So what do we know about feelings? This is not a surprise, maybe to me, but might be to folks here. Did you know feelings are evolutionary drivers? That even before thought, we had feelings? Mark Twain humorously says, I have been through some terrible things in my life, some of which actually happened. It's kind of the feeling all summed up in a row. Look, feelings were around before thoughts. On an evolutionary scale, as animals or beings, whatever you want to call us, we would have had feelings long before we developed our bigger brain. And the feelings would make us feel good about moving towards things that would help us survive or propagate, or they make us feel bad and we'd move away from things that could hurt us. And they're surprisingly powerful primordial responses. And every feeling encodes a judgment, positive or negative, otherwise it wouldn't be a feeling. Researchers even today are finding again and again that even the thinking brains that we have are still, every thought is preceded by a feeling. Preceded, not post. They come ahead. And it would make sense because they come out of the brainstem as opposed to the frontal cortex. So that would make sense that they still have that same order of evolution. But we as a society do something weird with feelings. We massage them, or we delve into them, or we parse them for meaning. We bring inflated responses from them. Sometimes they're unhelpful, sometimes they're hurtful. And we don't always study them as opportunities for growth. Now, where do feelings show up in our everyday lives? In something we all do most of the time. Feelings show up somewhere else in our lives. Feelings show up in our words. Our words are laced with feelings in all languages. As a matter of fact, the two are actually not even separable. And the reason is because words matter and words don't. Lichtenberg once said, one's first step to wisdom is to understand it, is to question everything. And words are containers of feeling. Every word we have is imbued with meaning. Most every word. It has an essence. It's dynamic, and it changes over time, right? Just even half a generation, and it's got a different meaning. And it's tainted. Every word I speak is tainted with things I mean, and it's interpreted by you with different taintings. So we get into the situation where we create inherently misleading communications with words. So much so that we're going to do a little test. I would like you to write down on that piece of paper 10 words that come to your mind when you think about the following word. The word du jour is success. I'd like you to write down 10 words on that paper that come to your mind when you hear the word success. So what'd you guys realize? Right? Isn't that shocking? So did anyone have one word match everyone in the group? Did anyone have one word match everyone less one person in the group? So it would be 6 for you. No. So did anyone have one word that matched the group minus 2 people? So we had to, okay, so there we go. So the groups are about 5 people, 6 people. So basically, in your best scenario, 33% of the people were disenfranchised. They had no idea what you were talking about when you used the word success. And if you want to go a little bit further with the analogy, no one completely understood you, and that was only 1 word out of 10. That means the other 9 words you had were, really out there, right? So go ahead, you guys can head back to your seats. Why is this important? Real understanding happens beyond words in our lives. That's why nonverbal cues make up 85% of communication. I could have done this in a book. I could have done it online. I'm doing it in person for a reason. You communicate by much else what you do. Another way to drive home the point that words are confusing and misleading is people write entire books to explain one singular concept, and they leave you wanting for more. You still don't really understand it. Because words are woefully inadequate to describe things, senses, feelings, those sorts of things. For example, try telling someone what love feels like. Try describing what chocolate tastes like. Words will leave you empty because they can never supplant experience, or real understanding. Words always fall short. Now, you may not know this, you may. Did you know if you don't learn a language by a certain age, that you can never learn to speak a language? Never. Never. I think it's like 7. It's like after age 7, 8 maybe. If you grew up in the wild, and you know you can't learn one later. Does anyone want to know why that is? Does anyone want to guess why it is? Because words are how we anchor all our thoughts. You think in words. You may not think you do, but you do think in words. And thinking the way we do it would be impossible without words. And that makes our emotionally laden, misleading words feeding us in our thinking. See where we're going with this? Can you see how their thoughts are maybe going to create some issues for us? Andrew Bernstein once said, negative thoughts stick around because we believe in them, not because we want them or we choose them. Now, I don't want to degrade thinking. Thinking is a powerful tool. It's created many wonderful, amazing discoveries and marvelous life-enhancing inventions, and it is the pride of Western culture, thought. But thoughts are imperfect, and they're skewed, and they're limited. It's limited to things you can only think about things you know of or that you've experienced, pretty much for the most part. I went on the psychology database to look up some biases that humans have. I think the original summary page had 80 of them. These are blatant human thinking biases that can be easily studied and validated. Put a few down here for your just to toggle your brain a little bit. Attenuation biases, anchoring biases, availability biases, confirmation biases, cognitive dissonance biases, framing biases, and on and on and on. Right? Our thoughts affect and alter how we perceive the world. And life isn't lived on the level of thought. Sidebar, strategic planning. Does anyone want to guess how many weeks a year a normal corporation will do in strategic planning? When you weigh in all the hours of a full corporation, not just the folks at top? Graham, you want to take a shot at this one?
3 months?
A week or two. Look at all the hours in an organization. A week or two. 5% of time max. Because strategic planning is this thinking tool. And if you think about it in your daily life, wouldn't that make sense? You know, you probably, if you're thinking on a regular day more than an hour a day on serious thinking, then you're probably thinking more than you need to. Because once you've decided and thought through things, it becomes a matter of executing and doing the things you need to do to achieve your goals, which doesn't require a whole bunch of strategic thought. And this is going to make more in a sense in a second. This happens, or we spend much more time doing thinking than we need to, and this comes from our psyche, and this comes from our evolutionary tendencies. Carl Jung once wrote, "Our life is indeed the same it ever was. The same physiological and psychological processes that have endured for hundreds of thousands of years still endure." What's he talking about? He's talking about this. Human survival biases. Did you know everyone in this room still has survival biases, evolutionarily planted in your brain from how we became who we are? They're risk-oriented, and they're excellent safety prevention, prehistoric safety mechanisms. Being constantly attentive to danger because you don't want to get eaten by a tiger makes sense. But as a result, today, 80% of our thoughts are pessimistic. Wanting to be part of the group and not cast out makes sense because it was certain death on the Serengeti. But today, ruminating, worrying, and thinking about relationships doesn't have the same outcome. As such, our psyche's wired now, hardwired, and human beings think of losses as twice as painful as gains, the same amount. And yet only 10% about what we worry about actually ever happens. So 90% of your worrying in today's society is wasted. There are no tigers to run from. And worry and anxiety are misplaced. You're not going to lose life or limb because you make a mistake anymore, most likely. And exclusion certainly no longer means death. Fear is a fraud. It's an overinflated survival mechanism because society's outpaced evolution. Period. End of story. And it continues to do so. And this isn't just when you're actively thinking. It shows up in another place. At Stanford University, Kelly McGonigal published a work which I think is really interesting. They studied what your brain went to do when it had nothing to do. Right? Sounds interesting. What does my brain go do when I have nothing to go do? Well, guess what it does? 4 evolutionary things. It goes and it world watches. It assesses, it labels, it judges, it creates, it assumes of all the world around it. This is like people say they want to sit at the table at the bar, so they can watch people go by. This is what they're doing. And this is a part of seeking better, part of feeling alive, part about feeling good about yourself. And these are my words. Kelly used different ones, but I like these terms. So world watching is one. The other one's crystal ball gazing. Who in here has been kind of caught up in the past or thinking about the future? All of us. But life doesn't happen in those times, right? And ironically, the past is really, and if you read Aspects of Success, you'll see this clearly, the past is really made up. And it's one of a million ways you could look at it, but you've just chosen to anchor with one. And there's a great quote by John Green that I love when it comes to the past. He says, "You don't remember what happened. What you remember became what happened." You don't remember what happened. What you remember became what happened. A lot of truth to that, and there's research to show it's true. And then, of course, there's the future, which almost never comes the way we think it's going to come. Then there's bust polishing. I think of a little statue of yourself, and you're always polishing it. Yeah, because, status and wealth and power and achievement and superiority, these are things that get you mating rights. And they also keep you higher in the pecking order, so you're less likely to die. Well, 10,000 years ago, anyway. And you strive as an ordinary course to present yourself in the best light. Not only do you do it objectively to get other people to see you in the best light, but you do it internally to yourself. You come up with stories so you can see yourself in your best light. We all do it. It'll become important as we move on. The last one is tribal chess. This is managing socialization. This is everything from fitting in to securing mating right. This is the strategizing, studying, and navigating relationships. So I'm sure this has never happened to anyone in this room, but it's happened to me. I don't know, probably daily. Did you ever get in an argument with somebody and you're really frustrated with them and they're responding ignorantly and they're annoying and you can't believe they're taking that position and it's just so ridiculous, right? And you want to scream. You want to scream because you realize you just spent the last 20 minutes having a conversation wasn't in the room with you, with someone who wasn't in the room with you. That you, in your mind, had an argument with somebody. In your mind, you had a fight. In your mind, you were upset about something. And you played it all out on your own little screen to no avail. If you think you don't do this, oh my goodness, you have an opportunity before you. And when I started seeing myself doing it, then I realized I was doing way more than I thought. So we all do it. It's part of the human condition. The question is, how's that all working for us? Well, Dan Millman said, you don't have to control your thoughts. You just have to stop letting them control you. How's that working for everyone in the room? Can you see where we're headed? We're going to go straight at them. Thoughts are our opportunity. Now, the human brain was growing super rapidly. And as a result, it had to come up with a way to reduce the use of glucose because it was consuming glucose at such an enormous rate that even though our brain was growing enormously, there just wasn't enough glucose in the environment. So it came up with this really weird and unique adaptation. I'm not sure that even other animals have it. We might be the only one. Does anyone want to guess what it is from the title? Habits. Habits. What did those do, Russ? Well, Eckhart Tolle warned us that it's not so much we use our mind wrongly, it's that we don't use it at all. It uses us. And what's he's talking about? Well, he's talking about habits. Habits are a powerful energy-saving adaptation. They offload the skyrocketing energy needs of the brain. In other words, a habit allows you to do something while you're not thinking about it. How is this helpful? You can think about other things. It's super powerful. Makes sense, right? But the problem is it comes at a price. And it's not a small price. Habits can be unhelpful at best, and they can be hurtful at worst. See, here's what habits do for us, and you see it everywhere. When I say these next 4 bullet points, you can say, oh, yeah, I see people do this all the time. It precipitates people doing things without thinking about them. It propagates and reinforces erroneous, subpar, and biased ideas. It causes us to compare, judge, and label on reflex, and it permits the passing of time without awareness. The last one's one of my biggest annoyances. Any questions on these? I love this phrase. I made it up, so it's mine. Beliefs are habits of understanding. It's a habitual way of understanding something. And we're all full of beliefs. The challenge, of course, is, do they serve us? Well, how might this show up? So I'm going to tell you 2 stories. One is the butterfly story. A little boy, 2 or 3, is out in the garden, and a butterfly comes up. It's the most interesting thing he's ever seen. He's never seen a butterfly before. Butterfly's flitting here and flitting there and landing on this, and the boy's chasing it around. Entertains himself probably for an hour looking at this butterfly. Finally goes up to his dad and says, Dad, what was that? Dad says, that's a butterfly. Son's like, Butterfly. Next day, the kid's, like most children are, is bored inside and says, Dad, I want something to do. Dad's like, why don't you go out and look for more butterflies? And the boy says, butterflies? I know what butterflies are. I don't want to go out and butterfly. How boring. What happened? What happened? What did the boy do? Yeah, he attributed his experience to be all there is to know about butterflies. And then he labeled it, he compartmentalized it, and he was done with butterflies. We all do it. Wait till you hear the strawberry story. So the strawberry story is very similar. Think of the first time, you won't remember, but the first time a child has a strawberry, they're just amazing. They're sweet and hopefully warm, and you just got them out in the sunshine, and they're juicy, and they taste like nothing you've ever eaten, and now I want to see if there's any strawberries in the tray over there because I've convinced myself that that's what I want next. And they're fantastic, right? And you eat the strawberry, and you enjoy it. It's just amazing. And the next time you eat the strawberry, you also enjoy it. Now, you keep eating the strawberry, but every time you eat the strawberry now, you know those little food price sticker labels? Imagine you stick one of those on the strawberry. That's your thought about the strawberry, okay? And the 10th time you eat one, and the 50th time, and the 100th time you eat, you keep sticking these little labels on. Well, eventually the day will come when your strawberry is completely covered with labels. And when you go to eat it, it's not going to be very juicy anymore. It's going to kind of be rubbery and plastic. It's not going to taste how you remember it. It's going to be dulled down, right? Not exciting, not fresh, not new. Because it's covered in your ideas about the strawberry. You're no longer eating the strawberry, you're eating your concept of the strawberry. So you can wolf down strawberries now and not taste them at all. But we do it with life. We do it with everything in life. And our thoughts start to contain the segments of life, and we wonder why is life not sunny and happy and joyful anymore? It has to do with how we're packaged our life and all the labels we've stuck on it. So I'm going to show you a lesson in mindfulness from Ted Lasso, which drives home the point. If you haven't seen the Lasso series, you need to see it. But Walt Whitman's quote, which is pulled out here, is be curious, not judgmental. And this is what we're going to aspire to. What happened? People had labels on their labels, right? They had assumptions on their beliefs, on their expectations underlying, because they weren't curious, they were judgmental. There's nothing wrong with it. It's a human trait to be judgmental, be categorical, to put things in a box, but it comes at a price. Einstein knew this, and he argued that no problem can be solved on the level it was created. But we as a society, and this is me being personal now, my job was to teach people to think better. But I've come to realize that all I'm doing is playing in the zoo. That I'm teaching people to think better thoughts. And when you do that, what you're essentially doing is putting the monkey in charge of the monkeys. You're saying your thoughts going to control your thoughts, but your thoughts, if they're the problem, become the issue. And they wonder why it doesn't work. When you have your thoughts control your thoughts, your monkey manage the other monkeys, your mind runs unchecked. Did you know 95% of the thoughts you had today are the same ones you had yesterday? And they'd be the same ones you have again tomorrow. 95%. And this creates this anxiety, this angst, this stress, this confusion, which can lead to depression and other things because that mind-body connection is well established. I'd argue almost every single non-metabolic mental illness comes from this process. And there's current approaches. I've been to half dozen therapists in my life. I needed a lot of work. But they use a technique. Can anyone tell me what CBT is? Cognitive behavior therapy. And cognitive behavior therapy is about challenging your thoughts and replacing better thoughts. So let me see if I got this right. You want me to think better thoughts, right? Okay, that's if you have some issues and you see a psychologist, and I encourage you to do that if you need that. And then my degree was in positive psychology. We do something similar. We teach people to appreciate more and focus on the good things that are more meaningful and fulfilling. So we teach them to think about those things. In all cases, we're thinking about our thinking. And we're chasing our tails. And that's why there's so much noise in your head. So much noise. Way more noise than you realize. And you can't even hear over the din sometimes. Maslow warned us, when the only tool you have is a hammer, you see every problem as a nail. When the only tool you have is your thinking, how are you going to try to solve every problem you have? By thinking your way through it. I'm here, spoiler alert, I'm here to tell you that thinking your way through it is not the best answer. There's a better way through every issue you have in life. Thinking may be part of it, but it is not the ultimate solution. And so we overfocus on our thoughts. We're taught thinking is the solution, and this creates this unhelpful, inaccurate, emotion-laden, word-based process that's evolutionary tainted to become our judge and our jury. And this mind-only approach creates challenges. Some greed, anxiety, desire, emptiness, these are all results of this process. And as such, we miss out on much of what really matters in life. Yet after thousands of years, tens of thousands of years, isn't it amazing that we don't have things figured out yet? Who else is flabbergasted by this? I mean, I'm not even sure we've made any progress, to be honest, and not emotively. Our intellect has let us down. This thought-based approach that we honor as a society isn't working, and we need to find another level of intelligence. Now, as I mentioned, your brain has analytic and problem-solving experience and expertise, and it's great. But Epicurus knew this thousands of years ago, that this could be an issue. He said, don't spoil what you have by desiring what you have not. Remember that what you have was once amongst the things you had only hoped for. And yet, once we get that thing we hoped for, we're on to the next thing. Why is that? Okay, now we're getting really into Russ's meat and potatoes. Happiness. Happiness exists beyond thought. Thoughts are excellent problem, don't get killed devices, but they can only process a small slice of all that is. Think of all the information there is in the universe. How much of that do you think you can process in your head? I rest my case, Your Honor. Very, very little. And our thinking can't comprehend beyond what it knows. When you're thinking about something, you're actually not in the moment, you're thinking. So you're always one step behind where the action really is, which would be the present moment. And we're all humans after all, we resist the new and unfamiliar. Your mind cannot understand happiness. You cannot think yourself happy. You cannot think yourself happy. I know you don't believe me. You cannot think yourself happy. It can't be done. It's actually thoughts that create our unhappiness. John Kabat-Zinn has a book, it's a tome, Coming to Our Senses. And in there he talks about something called orthogonal reality, more degrees of freedom. Any engineers or scientists in the room want to tell me what either the word orthogonal or degrees of freedom mean? Degrees of freedom are degrees of directions you can go. The word orthogonal is actually the best way to think of it. So we all know what a right angle is. Orthogonal is all the other angles that aren't right angles. So what John Kabat-Zinn is talking about is he says there's an orthogonal reality. There's a reality that isn't the right angles in our thinking. That's the infinite number of other angles we can think about or we can experience. And that greatly expands our degrees of freedom. Lao Tzu says, knowing others is wisdom, but knowing yourself is enlightenment. Our conditioning imprisons us. Matter of fact, we can't even perceive the potential for freedom in many cases. And many people live this kind of disturbingly shallow existence where everything's pleasant or unpleasant, good or bad, desired or resisted. I love this next phrase. This is his quote. I'm stealing it. We all live in a silent background radiation of dissatisfaction. And the problem is not that conventional reality isn't wrong. It's not wrong. It's incomplete. And it limits our possibilities and our solutions. and it stifles our understanding and our ability to grow in acceptance and compassion. Orthogonal reality is about moving from thinking to knowing. This is right where I transition the whole presentation. The other way to be is to know. Thinking is part of knowing. Knowing has thinking in it. Thinking doesn't necessarily have any knowing in it. And it's really important. Because when you move from thinking to knowing, you've shifted the mindscape. Nothing changes but your perspective. But the world you see has a lot more degrees of freedom. It's bigger, it's brighter, there's more space, and there's many more possibilities and options. Think of a greatest person of all, some of the greatest people of all time. What do they tend to have in common? What's that, Dan? Success. Yeah, they do. And how did they get that success? They usually do it in unconventional ways, right? Matter of fact, typically, the most famous of them all were the first to do something for the first time in a way that so shocked and woke up people that they changed the landscape forever and what was possible, right? Again and again and again throughout history, those are the same people. Why? Because what was inconceivable or unacceptable through standard thinking becomes plausible, realistic, and even superior through knowing. And don't worry, we're going to spend plenty of time on this. Mindfulness. Minding your mind. How do we start becoming the master of all this noise that's going on in our heads and these thoughts that are not perfect? Well, Carl Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. You are not your thoughts or feelings. They are a normal part of our common humanity, but we have gone too far. And we've entered this virtual reality. And we don't have to be controlled or lost in the swirling torrent of, yes, listen to these numbers, 12 to 60,000 thoughts a day go through the average person's head. And 95% of those are the ones you had yesterday. Life isn't lived in our heads, although we keep trying to do it and we wonder why we're miserable. We can learn to manage ourselves better and navigate life more productively. For we dream both asleep and awake. Where do we yearn to go? I'd argue that actually what we yearn more than anything else is to move back towards source. T.S. Eliot wrote, "We shall not cease from exploration, and at the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time." He's talking about our conscious. Let's use the ocean as a metaphor. Society today is on the surface of the ocean. It's choppy, it's noisy, there's wind and waves and danger, and if it's still, it isn't still for long, and you're tossed to and fro in a state of unpredictability. Does that sound familiar to anyone? Like this afternoon? Right. But right below the surface, there's a vast stillness on this ocean, just a few meters down. It's spacious and it's peaceful, it's uncluttered. It's a place of acceptance. It doesn't have self-chatter in it, or self-criticism or judgment of others. And it's where your strength, power, and knowing originate. This is where your wisdom and your happiness are. It is this quiet place that some refer to as the kingdom of heaven within. So CogniZense, it's 2 words. Comes from Greek, but the Latin versions are the ones we're going to go to, the etymology of them. There's 2 words that make up the word cognizance. The first is the word cognito, which is to examine, learn, and to know. And the second is sensus, which is to feel, perceive, and understand. Hence our English word cognizance, right? Except we don't spell it this way. And the reason we don't spell it this way is because I took some liberties. I also took the website at the same time. CogniZense the way I spell it, is about rising above your thoughts, your cognitions, your feelings, and your sense of self, your senses, to live a more wise, peaceful, and happier life. More Zen. CogniZense. That's where the name of the seminar comes from. And it's helpful because that's what we're going to attempt to do in this second half. I've brought you to the river. Now we're going to taste the water. Awake to life. But I am awake. We'll see. So I saw a movie back in the 80s, which my wife will attest to. We saw it together, which I hated when I first saw it, and since grown on to me to be one of my most favorite movies of all time because of what it's really talking about. It's Joe versus the Volcano by Tom Hanks. Anyone know this one? And the reason is because when you actually watch the movie and see what not the movie's stupid, but the story behind the movie, it's powerful. And the capstone to all the nice things about that movie is this phrase by Meg Ryan. Almost the whole world's asleep. Everyone you know, everyone you see, everyone you talk to. Only a few people are awake, and they live in a state of total, constant amazement. Awake to life. How do we wake up? I'm arguing that you're sleepwalking through life. Well, there's a straightforward process. And it's about refocusing your consciousness, or that me, that me, the person who isn't the self, your spirit. It's refocusing your consciousness to train yourself to be more alert and awake. In doing so, you're going to be able to identify many of the suboptimal patterns programmed in your mind. So one of the things Maura was talking about with beliefs is by becoming more awake, you'll actually start seeing the biases in them without actually having to change them. In behavior therapy, you never want to change a habit without what? You always want to replace a habit with another habit, right? Because then it gives something to fill the void. Well, it's no difference here. You don't want to force yourself to do things differently. You want to see how you're doing them, and then change will happen automatically. So an observed form of change is permanent, and a forced form of change is temporary. Think about it. You try to quit swearing or quit smoking, or whatever it is. Try to quit thinking negative thoughts, and then when things get stressed in your life, what happens? The negative thought reaches out from behind the bus, and it grabs the steering wheel and puts your bus in the ditch, right? Because you could manage it as long as you had the energy and the focus. But if you watch that process happen enough times, you'll just change because it's annoying, and you're just not going to do it anymore. So awareness is key to change. And there's many suboptimal patterns in your mind, and to awake is to use life actually as a springboard for personal growth. And awareness is the way to do that. So awareness. When you're born, you are naturally fully aware. If I could draw a circle to explain your awareness, it would look like this. Now, inside your awareness, you have some normal processes as a child that are fully developed. You've got 5 senses, possibly 6, depending whose definition you're using. And you've got this basic intuition and knowing. In addition, you have some feelings, and you have some desires. You're aware of some of those inside the circle, and you're not aware of some of those that are outside the circle. But as a child, you're basically an open book, right? But something weird happens when we grow up, as we start to get older. And as we reach our formative years, we stop relying so much on our awareness. And what happens when you stop using something? It atrophies. You stop working out, stop exercising, you atrophy, right? Awareness is exactly the same way. So we use it less, and it starts to shrink. This is a much smaller circle. And, well, we're hormonally laden teenagers in a society full of distractions, so our desires get really big. And our feelings get really big. And they cover up our awareness to some degree, or we're aware of it to some point. And they start to push our senses, our willingness to look and feel and smell and understand. They push our intuition, they push these things out of our focus. So we stop relying on our intuition as much. And this starts to lull us to sleep spiritually. And then our educational system, which is good for many respects, adds this whole thinking about thinking thing, which comes on strong in our formative years. What are you thinking? Well, I wasn't thinking anything until you asked the question. I'm a child. But now I got to think about my thinking? This is unfair. Well, school treats us the same way. We're going to think about our thinking. So, continuing the analogy, adulthood rolls along, and our awareness starts to shrink even further because it hasn't been used much in our formative years. And our desires and feelings, well, our desires, they've shifted. And we get them a little bit more under control because we're adults, we're not children, we're not crazy, but they're still not gone. Still want wealth and power and accumulation and things and experiences. And so, not completely gone. It's a smaller desire circle, but it's now, awareness has shrunk by more. Likewise, our feelings get more under control, but we still have this escapism and this drama and this anxiety and worry that goes on, some of which we're aware of and some of which we're not. And this pushes our senses and our intuition right at the margins. We rely on these very little as adults. And our thoughts. Well, we spend so much time thinking about our thinking and learning to think about our thinking that we ruminate and we overthink and we compare and we fear missing out and blah, 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 right? That's about what our thought bucket looks like. So is it any wonder it's hard to be aware in the moment? Because this is going on. These are 65,000 thoughts, 95% of which happened yesterday, 80% of which are negative. But besides that, you're doing great. Yeah, some circles grow so big that we start to lose our awareness. And as such, we lose that natural, innate judgment. It's obscured. Our sense of reality is altered. And it creates our perspective. It warps our perspective. And this alters decision-making. There's some really interesting work I've been reading recently about making decisions and how hard it is to make a good decision if you only use your thoughts. But aren't you supposed to make decisions using your thoughts? Partly. But you're also supposed to make decisions using your heart and using your dreams and using your intuition. But those aren't really being used. So here's our awareness, a normal person right now. There you go. That's what we're working with. Now, the problem, Alan Watts warns us, is if our thinking gets this big, is the person who thinks that all the time has nothing to think about except thoughts. So he loses touch with the reality and lives in a world of illusion. The best course of action isn't always arrived at by thought. It's known. How do we know this? How can we, in our current lives, see this show up? Well, there's two ways. There's the negative way and the positive way. Let's start with the negative way. Something happens. Someone close to you unexpectedly dies. Your business burns down and you've lost your home and you're on the streets. A big change happens in your life. Do you know what happens to your awareness in those moments? Tell me, what does it feel like when something like that happens? What do people always say when something really bad happens? They say, it was like time stood still. Thank you. Why? Do you know where there's no time? In full awareness. In full awareness, infinity is now. I'll leave that for a future course. But just take my word for it. So what happens is reality jars us awake. It drops our hands from our eyes. It right-sizes all the other circles, and our awareness goes right back to how it was when we were a child. And we got our five senses come back to center, our intuition, knowing, and look at this, our feelings, thoughts, and desires all get right-sized. That's about the ratio you should have for thinking versus being. And this generates a great calm and presence. You don't think about it, you do it. Everything stops in time, and you just do it, and nothing else seems to matter. You're fully 100% in the moment. You can be that way more often than you are now, and without negative things happening. And that's what I want to talk about. The observer. Whoops. a shift towards mindfulness. Buddha said to conquer oneself is a greater task than conquering others. That's why he was the Buddha. You are the one who witnesses. You may have abdicated your throne, but you are still the one who is allowed to witness. What does that mean? It means that you can watch your thoughts and feelings. Humans spend so much time thinking they've come to believe that they're their thoughts. You're not your thoughts or feelings. If I haven't driven it home by now, those are programs of words and ideas and images and impulses. They come from all sorts of evolutionary background, and when they don't come from there, they come from social or societal sort of anchors and triggers. You are consciousness, pure awareness, presence. You can see your thoughts and emotions and not be affected by them. You can sense and intuit. You were doing it as a child. You've given the throne up. The question is, do you want to take the throne back? Do you want to right-size your mental activity and reprioritize its importance? Because you can reclaim your authority. This is the wisdom journey. This is the inner journey I was talking about at the very beginning. You can reclaim your authority. Awake and aware is a better way to live. Ram Dass once said, our journey is about being more deeply involved with life and yet less attached to it. As the observer, some interesting things are going to happen for you. The relative importance of your machinations, of your mind's thinking, is going to go back to a more normal place in your life. And that's going to create all sorts of space. Because if you go from 65,000 thoughts down to 5,000 thoughts a day, you got a whole lot more still going on in there. And 5,000 thoughts, a lot of thoughts. Creates more space, allowing awareness and peace. As the observer, you're going to get more wisdom and understanding. And it's going to give you greater acceptance and compassion for other people. And you're going to put yourself back in control. And that's your innate place as the observer. And it reunites you with living. It peels the stickers off your strawberry, one by one by one. And in this way, you'll connect powerfully with flow and source. For the only reality is the current moment. That's why we call it present, because it's a gift. I know it's trite, but none there. It is a gift. And when I say source, connect you powerfully with source, I'm talking your consciousness. You can call it spirit. You can call it flow, presence, sentience, awareness. All of those words mean the same thing. And why do I use so many words to describe one concept? Well, as we learned earlier, words are not doing the concept justice, and they never will. And this is my biggest challenge with doing this seminar. And I'm going to come back to that at the very end. So, you guys have all been super patient. Russ, how do I get to be more aware and awake and mindful? Glad you asked. Mindfulness, it's the practice of a lifetime. If you're going to practice nothing else, going forward the rest of your life, if you're going to have to pick between exercising and doing this, or pick between eating right and doing this, I hate to tell you, this is probably the most valuable thing you could do. Now, I want you to eat right and exercise, just so we're clear. Thich Nhat Hanh once said, mindfulness is not evasion, it's a serene encounter with reality. Now, I modified one word in that quote, but mindfulness is a serene encounter with reality. And the reason I modified the word is because there's lots of ways to be mindful, and meditation is just one of them. You can reflect, you can pray, you can study, you can journal, you can meditate, and you can do mindfulness in daily life. You can do awareness practices while you're doing the laundry, while you're cutting the grass, while you're driving. Because mindfulness is a practice of getting back down on your throne, of being the observer, the throne you walked away from decades ago. So, you become the observer who witnesses the thoughts, the emotions, the ideations. So what are the fundamental steps to every practice that's going to help you become stronger? Well, here's the 4 steps. Every time you do these 4 steps, think of them as one sit-up. And the more sit-ups you do, the stronger you get. And the first time you do a sit-up, is it easy? Probably not. But over time, you can get to a place where you're doing 50, 100 sit-ups. and you're looking good. Well, it's the same in here. So here's the 4 steps to all mindfulness practices that are effective. You need to notice your thought or emotion or your ideation. Just got to notice it. Then you got to accept it. Not judge it, not analyze it, not have an argument with it like I had earlier today. You accept it with curiosity and openness. Thank you, mind, for bringing that to my attention. But right now I'm practicing mindfulness, and you let it go. Then you sit quietly, and you wait for the next thought or emotion. And when that one comes up, you honor it, you notice it, and you let it go. And you come back to the present moment. Now, there are an infinite number of techniques to do this. Many people will come back to the breath in the moment and be still and present in the moment that way, but there's lots of ways to do it. Sound, other things, etc. Now, why do I mention all this? Because the benefits come quickly. Just 10 minutes of meditating a day or some of these other practices makes a measurable difference. And I'm going to talk about the statistics in a minute. But the best way to understand this process is to do a short meditation. The best way to understand mindfulness is to do it. How was your first sit-up? It's that practice of becoming aware of your thoughts that we can become really good at. And in so doing, we'll gain control back over our lives and our happiness too. It's an opportunity for more space and for more joy. Life's an amazing adventure, and if for some reason you don't think it is, this is for you. Because you've just got too many labels on your strawberry. And it's time to be still and start letting those labels go, and over time you'll become the master of your thoughts again. Doesn't mean you control what pops in your head. You're going to have weird thoughts the rest of your life. You're going to have emotions pop the rest of your life. You are human. But your ability to be engaged by them and thrown off course by them will greatly diminish. And you'll become the master of your universe. Meditation, one of my favorite slides, is not what you think it is. No, it isn't. But it's powerful. James Allen once said that meditation is the secret of all growth in spiritual life and all knowledge. Does it work? There's just been 500 or so studies in the last 25 years that show it works. 500 or so, plus or minus. It works. It works, it works, and it works in a whole bunch of complementary ways. Meditation stops negative mindset spiral patterns. It stimulates your brain, not only improving cognition, but slowing decline. It stabilizes your emotions, dampens your thought disorders, especially anxiety and depression, massive improvements in these areas, because those are mostly thinking diseases. It improves your personal resilience and your empathy, and it decreases stress. Of course, people are healthier because of that. Also, equally, if not most important, it enriches your life and your relationships and your quality of your life. Every day is going to seem a little better. So there's some mind-mending results. Awareness. It changes the heart. Aristotle once wrote, "He who has overcome his fears will truly be free." Awareness changes your heart because being alive and living aren't the same thing. For one never really knows where they're going, and that fear is a fraud. It's just a scary way of looking at things. Evil may be all around, but if you're awake and aware, it won't bite you. Life may be difficult, but it'll never be unbearable. Tongue in cheek, what's unbearable is having your mind off work at 6 while you're at work at 10 a.m. That's unbearable. Or my personal favorite, what's unbearable is being in Buffalo in the winter and wishing you were in Florida. That can happen. Aware, you know death's going to come, but it comes more of a curiosity than a fear. And every adversity is met with equanimity. In fact, so much so that your goals and your failures, both those are misnomers. The labels don't apply. Every experience is met equally. Even enslaved, you'll find people who are fully aware of joyful and peaceful. For happiness is our natural state. So I'm going to give you another way to think about happiness, because I told you earlier our thoughts were a problem. Think of happiness as the sun. During the day, the sun's always out, right? But you don't always see it. Why? Clouds, fog, right? So if you think of the clouds as your thoughts and your emotions, you could go a long time without seeing the sun. And many Americans haven't seen the sun for years because there's so many thoughts and emotions blocking the sun. But the sun's always there. It's ever present. But as you meditate, you have fewer thoughts. And when storms come, they don't last as long. And as you become more mindful, more blue sky is opened up. And so what happens in time is the ever-present sunshine starts to really show through. And that's where happiness is. That's why you can't think your way happy, because that just puts more clouds in the air. Temporarily, I guess you can push them out, but they'd come right back. You can't think yourself happy, and you can't act to become happy, because happiness is your natural state. You need to take everything else away so it can shine through. Thoughts, questions? The mystic. In the world, not of it. Socrates wrote, "The only true wisdom is knowing that you know nothing." Ah, Socrates. The wise amongst us, the mystics. They live in accordance with their destiny, free of society's norms and mores. And to us, to the average person, they're going to seem a little nutty, a little crazy. But they live in this state of ecstasy, hence my Joe and the volcano quote. They're happy in the purest sense. To them, every day is a good day to die. To take the Native American mantra that they used to, the proverb, make today a good day to die. Well, to the mystic, every day is good because they've fully lived every day since, and every day forward they'll do the same. And that detachment, it prospers everyone around them. As a matter of fact, their desirelessness blesses everyone. And they're no longer at the world's mercy. We care so much about so many unimportant things. What if we stopped? This is a personal aside. I regularly work with people who have challenges. You might imagine that people come and ask me questions because I have some insight in this space. And lately, I've heard myself saying this phrase again and again and again. What if you just didn't care? How much happier would your life be if you just didn't care? If that thing the person said you just didn't care about? If that parent who didn't treat you the way you needed to be treated, you just stopped caring about it? What would happen in your life? I mean, does anyone in here have something that they wish they just didn't care about anymore? Do you know who's keeping it front and center? Yeah. You do. And partly, that's the world's fault. So, I told you in my teens I started to do personal development work. What does the world tell us that the highest form of personal achievement is? To become fully, what? Aware. I like that, but that's not what the world says. The world says you should become fully actualized. Who can tell me who Maslow is? I quoted him earlier. He was hammering on it with his nail. Maslow, what did he come up with? Hierarchy of needs. Very good. And what was on the bottom? Like food and survival stuff. And what was at the top? Self-something. Self-actualization, right? Everyone knows this. This was one of the most profound psychological pieces ever written. It's still used everywhere. I still see it all the time. And to become fully self-actualized is what we're told to do. Everything I did from my teens on, I was trying to be fully self-actualized. I went back to grad school. I went to get my doctorate. I went and took the right jobs and moved to the right towns. I studied and I read and I worked on me, right? Because I wanted to be fully self-actualized. That's what I thought it was all about. My book, Aspects of Success, is like literally the Bible on self-actualization. This is how do you become your best you. And in your formative years, as a teenager and young adult, these are really important skills. Now, ironically, there's no one in this room that has all these, so there's a benefit for every age at this. You're not going to be able to read this and say, I'm good at everything. So plug if you want to read it. There's still copies. Help yourself. My seminar was the same way. The seminar I taught was always on how do you become self-actualized. All my personal work, all my professional work, retreat work, Graham knows, was always about, like, how do you become a better me, right? And this was important. In fact, the 12 years I ran the Camus group, does anyone want to guess what my title was? Actualization strategist. Maslow was in my title. So to say I had bitten this worm hook, line, and sinker would be an understatement. I was all into self-actualization. But it stopped working for me. And I came to the realization during my sabbatical that the problem was that by its very definition, self-actualization points where? Incurvatus sensae. That thing which curved in on itself is less than a greater thing. The lowercase c in Latin. Self-actualization is about me. And you know what? That's sold. And it's sold, and it's sold, and it still sells. Go down to self-help aisle of any bookstore, and it sells. But you know what? I found out that I wasn't the only one bothered by this. First off, the Bible warns us right up front that if you live according to the flesh, you'll die. But if you live by spirit and put to death the deeds of the body, you will live. This is the ultimate and anti-self statement, right from Romans. But Maslow knew it too. Later in his life, he didn't like his hierarchy. It bothered him. As a matter of fact, he realized it was so incomplete and it bothered him so much that he went back to his case studies and looked at the ones that were the outliers. And the outliers were people like Abraham Lincoln and Mother Teresa. And they really bothered him. He's like, what's going on? These are not these people are beyond self-actualized. And he realized there's a greater pinnacle of human achievement, and he published it. Yes, this is actually out there. Go research it. You'll laugh. It's been there for decades. But he published it in an esoteric journal, and it didn't fit with the world's self-orientation because me sells and not me doesn't sell, right? So he rewrote his hierarchy. Self-actualization is the second one. Do you want to guess what the top one is?
Outward actualization.
Self-transcendence. Maslow changed his hierarchy. Self-transcendence is the highest form of human achievement. It's to move beyond the self. I was blown away. And it turns out I'm not the only one who knew about it. Turns out really smart people have known about this for a really long time, and I find that irritating that it took me 40 years to get where who knows how these other people knew this. Einstein wrote, the true value of a human being is determined primarily by the measure and sense with which he's attained liberation from himself, his or herself. What? Smartest man in the world doing physics and E equals MC squared, and he's philosophizing on the side, and he's right. This ego, this self, is much of the modern world, but it comes at a price. It does create a sense of identity and meaning, and it drives many self-enhancing activities. I'm a better person for all the things I did to make this book happen, and all the personal work I've done. I'm a better person for it, and it's helpful in your formative years. But your ego, as you get older, becomes limiting. It becomes a millstone, actually. It actually can keep you from being happy in mid and later life. And this is, I'm looking at more because we had talked about this a little bit earlier. So I'm going to give you a way of thinking about ego that will help you think about how come it creates a problem for people. So I want you to imagine that your ego is like you built a hut. And I'm going to let us all live in the desert today. So you build this little hut of yourself, and you stick it in the desert. And this is your place. And that, because you live in the desert, it sets a boundary where you'll go. You'll go to the desert. You live there. And you won't go to the mountains, and you won't go to the hills. And you're going to go to the desert, okay? And that's what you know. And that's what you know. You know about the lizards, and you know where the watering holes are, and you know what time of day not to be outside, okay? But you know nothing about how to make a house out of wood, because you don't live in the forest, and you know nothing about snow. Other people do, but you know nothing about these things. And this hut you live in creates a basis of comparison. Well, my type of hut's the right type. You made yours out of wood. I made mine out of animal skins. And, how silly to make out of wood. Or to make it out of ice if it's an igloo. It creates a basis for comparison. And so your ego forms expectations and desires, and it makes you feel unique. But the price of uniqueness is separateness. Every time you feel unique, you've separated yourself from everyone else. You've put distance between, you've literally stiff-armed someone. Your uniqueness comes at the price of pushing other people away. The walls of this hut you've created, this ego, this self, they're illusionary. You created them in your mind. And they're helpful earlier in life, but they become a millstone, and they keep you from experiencing all life has to offer. The self is not real. We created it to understand the world, and now it holds us hostage. With these labels, these categorizations, these judgments, these conceptualizations. Me, my, mine, or who made whom, paying homage to AC/DC with a grammar lesson. It's who made whom. Michael Singer wrote, "The spiritual path is always about letting go of yourself." Always. It has to be. And yet we spend our lifetimes maintaining our sense of self, the I am me. But as we started the whole seminar off with, who is that? Who is this I am that we speak of? Now, your sense of self, this ego, has another problem. Turns out, it's a shapeshifter. In fact, it vacillates, it changes, it morphs, and it breaks down. Prove it to you? Has anyone ever been a different me, a different self on the day something goes wrong in the morning? Has anyone been a different self if someone said something negative about you? Has anyone ever been a different self if someone's hurt you? Has that changed how you showed up when you showed up? Of course, because the self is a reactionary thing we sort of made up. So since it's not real, it changes based on the situation, and we draw pieces of it here and there, and it has no cogence. If you analyzed it and wrote it down on paper as a flowchart, it would look like a cloud. Swirls, just curl back in on itself. Every version of you is limited and confining. You are imaginary. You only exist in your head. There is no self. So there's a great story. In the 1950s, there was this huge statue of Buddha, and some Tibetan monks had to move it. The thing was giant, really big. So before they moved it, they did a study of it, and they found this crack in it, and they were concerned because I want to move it if it's cracked. So they did some forensics. They had some more modern tools in the 50s, and they realized that the crack had been there all along. They just didn't notice it. And actually, the crack was filled with sealer, which they thought was kind of weird. So they took some instruments, and they went up underneath into it to see what was going on. You know what they found? Solid gold Buddha statue was inside. That 500 years earlier, the monks during a war had covered the golden Buddha with clay in order to hide it so it wouldn't be stolen. And everyone forgot about it. And so this outer sheath, this clay, this protection, this package, if you want, was mistaken for 500 years as the real statue. That outer layer is your ego. And the gold is your consciousness. And right now, you're covered in clay, metaphorically speaking. So how do we get rid of that fake exterior? Well, turns out it's not as complicated as it sounds. Let go. When you grasp yourself, you grasp a vapor. Stephen Hawking said the greatest enemy to knowledge is not ignorance, it's the illusion of knowledge. So true. We think we know, and yet we haven't even scratched the surface. And I say that from personal experience. So my recommendation would be to tear down, move out, and escape that ego hut of self. Look, the fixed identity you set for yourself is too small. You don't just live in the desert, in an animal skin hut. You're so much more. Because your current ego requires a huge amount of energy to maintain. It costs you your time, your presence, your peace. And the walls. The walls are the issue. You live in this little hut. You can't see the stars. You can't see the herds of animals going by. You can't see all the other ways to live. Because all you can see is the walls you've created and the stories you tell yourself about yourself. Look, everyone in this room feels like something's missing to some degree. This is it. And I can tell you firsthand, if you can double down, when you get the first million, you get another million. When you get the first CEO job, you can go for a CEO job for a Fortune 500 company. You get the first sports car, you can go get a Lamborghini. But I can tell you, none of it will make you any happier. Doubling down on worldly pursuits won't. This will. Doubly pursuits won't work. Look, yourself no longer serves you. I think I made the point. Enlightenment is a spiritual quest. I don't know if anyone here knows Anthony DeMello. He was the mystic Catholic priest who died way too young, who had some very great, I've read probably every book he's ever written. DeMello says it this way. The spiritual quest is a journey without distance. You travel from where you are right now to where you've always been, from ignorance to recognition, for all you do is see for the first time what you've always been looking at. Spirituality, after all, is only a matter of becoming what you really are. You're a human being, not a human doing. You're a spirit. This body will come and it will go. Freedom comes when you do a couple things in your life. And these are the biggies. And I've alluded to these a couple different ways, but we each need to stop assuming and start questioning and question all our beliefs, because this stuff limits us. We've got to let go of these labels and judgments and stereotypes because they blind us. We've got to drop expectations and desires because they cause anxiety and pain. If you didn't expect things or didn't have desires, you wouldn't have problems around these things. We've got to avoid ego pursuits, just empty distractions, and we just end up a year older and maybe $1 richer. Instead, we need to see that our true nature is one in the most true sense of spirit. For can you go outside and tell me one tree is better than another? Or can you look at the bones of a sinner and tell them different from the bones of a saint? The trick is to live honoring our spirit. You are and always have been free. I want everyone to think of a problem in their life. Specifically, I want you to think of either a situation that's unfair, a troubled relationship, or a past hurt. A situation that's unfair, a troubled relationship, or a past hurt. Does anyone have one of those in their head? I want everyone to have one in your head. So get one in your head. An unfair situation, a troubled relationship, or a past hurt. Everyone got one? Okay. If you did not exist, would it still be a problem? If you did not exist, would it be a problem? For you. You don't exist, right? It wouldn't be a problem, right? So where's the problem lie? If your existence is the thing that keeps the problem in place, then where's the problem? You are the problem. Your label, your judgment, your expectation, your desire. We are the cause of all our problems. Okay, let's do a relationship. Everyone know who Gottman is? Gottman's a famous relationship therapist. He's written more about marriage relationships than anybody in the world. He's very famous for being able to tell whether a relationship will succeed in like 5 to 10 minutes. And he's pretty good at it, like 80% hit rate. I won't get into all that. That's for your private exploration. I will ask you a question, though. He loves to go up to couples and say, if there's a 100% of a relationship, what level of responsibility do each of you have in that relationship? Daughter, dad. 100%. Each of you gets how much of that 100%? Anybody? Any other answers? Do I hear 50%? Yeah. Most often I get 50%. And that kind of makes sense, right? Like, I should be in charge of some of the relationship and other people be in charge of the other. And 50-50 get together and make 100. Turns out a 50% commitment isn't enough. Each person has to be 100% committed to the relationship or it won't work. And I'm bringing up Gottman because this has to do with you. Unless you're 100% committed to taking responsibility for everything that happens in your life, you might as well not be committed at all. I work with the spectrum of folks, and there seems to be the most dysfunctional people in the world fall on this one end of the spectrum, and they always have the same story. This happened to me, and this was unfair, and I can't believe they said this, and therefore I'm on welfare, and therefore I'm getting handouts from the state, and therefore I'm a victim, and this is a terrible situation, and I hate the world because the world's been mean to me. And at the other end of the spectrum, there are those folks who say, I'm the cause of all my problems. And even when I'm not, I take full responsibility for the situation at hand, and I'm going to do something with it. Most of us are somewhere in between. But to truly become enlightened, we need to move from victim to victor. We need to move from helpless to fully responsible. Now, people will often argue with me at this point, how can I be 100% responsible for the things other people did? You can still take responsibility. Why now? Well, the harvest is plentiful. This teaching I'm talking about has been known for thousands of years. Of course, not to me. This is relatively the last couple of years of my work. But it's been known for thousands of years, and it's a story that's been told by philosophers and poets and mystics and sages and prophets and spiritual leaders to some way, form, or another since the beginning of time. And yet, the human condition seemingly remains unchanged. I'm effort to argue there's more vitriol, unhappiness, anxiety, and mental illness than ever before as we think about our thinkings and revel in our emotions. Yet we are the change the world needs. The Dalai Lama had an article recently which I really appreciated. He talked about how the problem people have is when an insult comes their way, they take it personally. But he says there is no you. There is no us to take personally. Pride is a made-up, fictitious thing. Let it go. He says if you move beyond pride, then you immediately see the insult for what it is, a reflection of the person who's put it out there. And even more so, you see it as an opportunity to serve. Because by absorbing that insult and reflecting back joy, absorbing that insult and not pushing it back into the world, you've done a good deed for the world. It's a profound way of twisting that logic around beyond self. And it's powerful. You see, it starts with you and me. And we can only raise the we are the ones that have to raise the collective consciousness. Actually, this group was invited here because all of you and I have had conversations in this space before in one way or another. But you can only give away what you have. And until you work on you and make yourself 10 steps down this mindfulness path towards enlightenment, you can't give it to other people. You just end up being the problem. Lao Tzu wrote, those who know do not speak, and those who speak do not know. Well, we all know the last part of this is true. If you've watched any politicians on TV, that's obviously true. It's the first part of this I want to hone in on. What do you think he's getting at here? Those who speak do not know. I'm sorry, those who know do not speak. What is he talking about here? Why would that be? Why would people who know not speak? And there's two good answers for this. I mean, I can't put myself in his head, but I suspect that he had a very specific reason why he knew, but he wouldn't say. Because what does he have to use to communicate that? And what's going to happen when he starts using words? And is he ever going to be able to explain an experience with words? So no matter what he does, it's going to fall woefully short. Russ, your presentation keeps circling back on itself. Yes, it does. You can't tell someone what it feels like to be in love. Words don't work. Likewise, I can't tell you what chocolate tastes like. So you have to experience this for yourself. And this is what I ran into creating this seminar was exactly this issue, is that my words are not doing this justice. And I know that. But yet I feel compelled to try. But this is the answer. This is the way forward. And this is our duty, to wake up, to become aware. It's the most human thing we can do to get rid of ourself so that we can make the world a better place. I'd argue it's the ultimate Christian act of personal development. Death to the self. Not in a bloody, murderous way, but in a, I'm going to right-size you, and yeah, okay, that's great, and you got me here, but now you're standing in my way. You're standing in between me and possibility. To transcend yourself, you got to know yourself first, so hence you need to be mindful. But once you do, this changes your relationship with everyone and everything. You see, the kingdom of heaven awaits. We got to take our egos off the throne and let God be back on it. We really do. Yes, the harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. I always got the question, or had a conversation with people, well, my meaning in life, and I need to find my meaning, or I'm looking for purpose in life, and I'm missing out on these things. Meaning and purpose seem to be ubiquitously desired by human beings. This is the ultimate meaning and purpose. To become mindful so you can take your rightful place amongst your thoughts and emotions so they're no longer running your life, and then you can start to divest yourself of that self you've made up, that ego. And as you transcend yourself, the sun will shine all the time. Not only will you be happy, but you'll be a gift and a blessing to everyone you meet, everyone you work with, the whole world around you. Frederick Douglass said, a man is worked upon by what he works on. What are you working on? Now, awakening, this process is not something to be done separate from the world. Some people think, like, I'm going to go to a monastery, I'm going to go on a retreat. That's fine, but really, you can do it everyday life. I'd argue that you're going to get better benefits and yield greater dividends by doing it in everyday life, because the world will never disappoint you. If you want to find one of your beliefs that's bothering you, does anyone know the trick for figuring out if a belief isn't serving you? When you feel a negative emotion, it's 100% positive that there's a belief that's not serving you. Every single time. So every time you have a negative feeling of any kind, you already know you have a belief that's erroneous. Now, you're going to go find it? You're going to tease it out of that repertoire of habits and bring it to the surface? Or are you going to you're going to let yourself be victim of it and be upset by it again and again and again? The universe is kind. It'll keep giving you the same lesson over and over again until you get it right. By staying active in the world while you do your mindfulness and while you become awake, it allows you to also to shine where the battle rages, because true greatness lies with those who've mindfully awoken and transcended themselves. So yes, the psychologist wrote this, when would now be a good time for you to start? When would now be a good time? One of my favorite phrases. It's a narrow gate. There's no one way to awareness. And the worst thing I can do is give you a technique, because you'll focus on the technique and then you won't actually do the waking up that you need to do, because your process is going to require numerous approaches and a lot of dead ends, but you can find your way if you're interested in finding your way. It reminds me of the story of the mystic who comes to a town, or the prophet who comes to a town, and he's in the Amazon, and he tells them of this city made of gold, and he tells them how to get there, and you got to go down 3 turns of the river, and he draws them a map, and then he leaves. And he comes back 20 years later, and they've never gone to the Golden City. And he asks them, well, why haven't you gone to the Golden City? And they say, oh, no, that map you drew us, it's in the front of our church. We pray and we honor this map. This is our religion. This map is our religion. And that's what happens with folks, is the technique becomes the way. So I'm not going to tell you that I have a technique for you. My journey will be a unique fingerprint, just like your unique fingerprint will be your journey. What I will tell you is I'm interested in taking my 4 decades of personal research work, my 2 decades of retreat facilitation and training work, and the last 2 years on this sabbatical, and working with folks who are interested in doing more of this kind of work. I don't know if that's readings or exercises, if it's additional seminars or teaching pieces, if it's process work. I don't know what that looks like. But I do know I'm interested in it, and I do know this as well. I've been looking for this information for a long time. There isn't much out there There are not many people doing this work. I mean, they're out there, but they've somehow been marginalized at the fringe of society, and yet I can't think of anything more important. So if you don't work with me, at least avail yourself of all the resources that are out there. Amazon's got great books on mindfulness. I could give you 20 great books that would keep you busy the rest of your life growing in this direction. But next to your sign-in sheet, next to your name, there's a little box. And if you're interested in exploring possible future ideas, just check it on your way out, or if you want to think about it, send me an email or a text. And we'll figure out where we go from here. But like I said, I can't think of anything more practical or more valuable in life than to gain the peace and joy that can come from this process. It's rare and unique. And to be perfectly honest, it would be an honor to walk with you on this journey if that was something you wanted to do. But again, I don't have your answer. I'll never have your answer. But I can help you find your own answer. And that's the whole point.